I'm sorry, before I forget, thank you again to LaMention for sponsoring this afternoon's coffee and dessert break. It was very delicious. Well done. And there seems to be plenty left over, so go back for seconds and thirds. We fully applaud that behavior here. This afternoon keynote is called Industry Perspectives, How to Drive Efficiency and Improve Security. As always, we leave our afternoon keynote on Monday to invite a select group of industry thought leaders to address and share industry perspectives on the most important issue that the community is facing. And obviously right now, as we move towards modernization and transformation and ultimately efficiency, it's that big question mark of security that hangs over all of these various activities that are ongoing in our agencies. To that end, we have some esteemed colleagues here this afternoon. We do again want this to be interactive. We've gotten some questions that we've put together as a panel over the last few weeks. I've gotten some questions from communications with different research calls with government. So we'll do some of these. We then may break, ask you guys if you have any comments or questions, and then keep going. But before, let me just go ahead and start by introducing everybody. To my far left is Mr. Michael Singer, Executive Director of Technology Security at AT&T Government Solutions. Michael leads a Gemini program team focused on developing and integrating security technologies for the benefit of AT&T customers. Michael has filed for 7 patents and has a strong background in software development, operations management, and cybersecurity. He joined AT&T in 1990 as a software developer and spent his first 5 years in Kansas City and Atlanta designing software used by network engineering to manage orders and assets. To my left is Chris Pullen, on the other page, who is the Chief Security Officer at Q1 Labs, an IBM company. Chris brings a balance of management experience and technical skills encompassing his 25 years in IT, information security, and software development to his role as security systems strategist at IBM, which is his new title. I apologize. Chris is responsible for the continual evolution of IBM's family of solutions to keep pace with emerging security threats, customer needs, and industry trends. To my right is David McNeely, who is the Senior Director of Product Management at Centrify. David works with customers to drive the roadmap for Centrify's award-winning identity and access management solutions. He has worked in the identity and access management market for over 16 years, holding various product marketing and management positions at Active Identity, AOL, iPlanet, and Netscape. At Netscape and iPlanet, he was the Director of Product Management for the directory and security product lines, where he first promoted the concept of a centralized directory for all identity and access management. And last but not least, Mr. Chris Martell, who is a Senior Cybersecurity Architect at Intelligent Decisions. Chris's qualifications include an MBA specializing in information systems technology, cyber industry certifications such as CISSP, CIM, CJIT, and others, and detailed knowledge of security tools, technologies, and best practices. He brings 14 years of experience in the creation and development of solutions protecting network systems and information assets from diverse companies and organizations, ranging from private organizations to government agencies. So as you can see, we have a lot of combined experience up here. And again, what's going to be great about this panel is that each one comes with a different background, with different customers they represent, and frankly, different solutions. But ultimately, the common thread here is that this move towards efficiency and what are they seeing in the government space. And I really like this because a lot of times the government speakers cannot speak very frankly because of certain restrictions on them, and these folks can. With that, I'm going to go ahead and ask each speaker to just give a brief 1-minute overview just to make sure we're clear on who they are, what they do, and what their companies represent. And I'll go start to my far left with Chris.
So I'm the Senior Cybersecurity Architect at Intelligent Decisions. I come from, well, a lot of you I've already met today and yesterday. I come from many different organizations with some experience. So intelligence community, worked with FBI and ODNI, and through ODNI, pretty much hit every other of the 17 intelligence agencies out there. And then also worked with Department of Defense, GSA, to quasi-government agencies like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and also did Securities Exchange Commission. And so I've done a lot of policy development, some continuous monitoring, some information assurance, done a lot of certification accreditation, been on both sides, supporting documentation as well as doing work for OIG, DHS, and stuff like that. So.
Great, thank you. David?
Great, thanks. I'm David McNeely with Centrify, and our solution has been centered around integrating, centralizing the management of Unix and Linux systems and data centers as a way to ensure that we enable only the correct people to gain access to those particular systems based on authorization policies that you centrally manage, establishing roles for those users, granting them access rights based on the rights that need to be granted to individual roles, and then auditing the user activity. That goes a long way towards helping most of our customers get FSMA compliant on their systems as they're looking at information assurance, and we also have built out quite a few products that address a lot of the network security aspect of securing the communication in between systems.
Great. Chris?
Well, thank you. So I know there's no such thing as an ex-Marine, but apparently there is ex-Air Force because I'm one, and so that's what qualifies me to be here. I also, in the Air Force, worked for the NRO before you could actually say that, so that's sort of my qualification. Most recently, worked for Q1 Labs, which was acquired by IBM. And what we do is a SIM. So for those of you who don't know what SIM is, we think about log management, then think about putting intelligent correlation on top of it and coming up with interesting results. So actually finding the bad guys. What I like to say what we do is we don't necessarily stop the bad guys, but we help you to detect the bad guys early on in the kill chain so you can arrest it. So I think that I will leave it at that and move on to my next.
Okay, thank you. Michael Singer. The last 10 years at AT&T have been setting up our cybersecurity 24/7 team, building all the tools that they use, and then the surrounding team that supports them. And we have come up with some security services on the enterprise side as well as on the government side as a result of those things that we've developed and used ourselves. 5 of the 7 patents are U.S. patents now, so we've made some progress there, and some of the technologies we came up with that we're using for ourselves and for our customers.
Fantastic. And I always like to kick off this panel by asking kind of one general question and see what everyone's point of view is to give the audience kind of a litmus test of the perspectives here. And seeing as how we're talking about efficiency, I was wondering what you think, each of you think the biggest barrier is to achieving security while we're modernizing, transforming, doing all these great things. And Michael, I will go ahead and start with you.
Yeah, I think as far as efficiency, I've lived through some times where we were reducing at like 10% a year levels at AT&T, mostly in the 90s. And to me, the big takeaway is that if you focus too much on that bottom number of the efficiency equation and less and less and less, it's very destructive, it's very hard on the people. But if you focus on doing more and enabling your ability to do more with less. So what are the enablers? What new platform have you given to your people? What new tools have you given to your people? That will create your ability to do a lot more. And it really, even if you had the same number of people, they're just able to do a lot more. Best example is a platform we built called Rules You Build Yourself. And we had people, we challenged them. We said, what is it that you do over and over again? What is it that's monotonous? Annoying parts of your job? Build a rule to do that for you. And because of that, we were able to automate what now would be thousands of people doing manual tasks. But that investment in that upfront platform was key to letting us do more with less in our network side.
Great. Chris?
Right, okay, cool. So I kind of look at this as a Christmas Carol problem, right? There's past, present, and future. And so the past is that we focus so much on building out really complex technology over the last 10, 15 years, defense in depth and all that stuff, that we're at the point now where we need to sort of reduce that down, right? And focus on things that are actually solving the problem. Because I think if you look at the headlines, you'll recognize that all of that stuff, while useful, right, is not solving our ultimate problem, which is stopping complex and determined attackers. So that's number one. The present is compliance, right? So that becomes a really difficult problem because not only we're securing to solve a problem, which is to keep people out and to keep data in, but it's also we're securing against compliance. We have to balance those two needs. And then finally, the future, which kind of is the present at the same time, is ambiguity, right? We talk about crazy terms that drive me batty, like cloud. What does that mean? I just had conversations with people about cloud. Are we talking about your virtual environment? Are we talking about Amazon cloud? Are we talking about a hybrid? We talk about big data, which we're still not entirely clear on. Bring your own device, which we kind of have our heads around, but it's still, there's a lot of nuances. So the future is actually putting some clear, concrete concepts around the terms that are just sort of amorphous right now. So those are the 3 things, and in the rest of our questions, I'm sure we'll be talking about solutions to those.
Great, thanks. David?
Great. I think in looking at a lot of the customers that we've spoken with and some of the challenges that they face, some of the biggest problems have been change management within the organization. Both on the system side of things, as we look at changing the way that we manage the systems, the users that access, as well as changing some of the processes. In a lot of cases, we can consolidate processes and reuse existing workflows that we've already got in place. If you've already got an IDM system, there's bound to be a way to leverage that and extend its reach across more of the environment to make it a lot more efficient. We've had a number of customers that have been able to do that and consolidate and really eliminate a lot of extra overhead that different staff had been performing previously, and eliminate that kind of burden from those people. That does require a lot of different organizations to come together and work together that traditionally haven't been. So that change also is kind of difficult, where if we need to get 2 or 3 different teams together that typically haven't spoken before, and getting them to work together, because they'd work better together if they would be able to leverage each other's strength within the organization.
Thank you. And Chris?
So the question is, what is one of the biggest barriers to the agencies face while achieving efficiencies but improving security? So there's a long list, but building off that last response, organizations, government organizations tend to have very detailed and cumbersome policies on trying to implement new technology. So, for example, I know there's some agencies and a customer that's actually deploying their new workstation, their next generation workstation, which is Windows XP. So a Windows XP deployment is their next generation workstation. They'll be done this year, but the operating system is going to be retired. Microsoft no longer supports it in April 2014. So now we got to start the whole process over again. So Windows XP, everybody's like, what this is new technology? No, it's safe, it's secure. They can build that environment. And even shorter life cycles. Look at the iPad. Everybody's talking about the mobility and the iPads and stuff. So you got about a 2-year life cycle on iPads. The iPad 1 come November is going to be done with, no longer supported with the iOS updates. So you're talking approximately 2 years, and you're losing technology. So how do you get this how do you improve your efficiencies and maintain security? And it's sharing some of the requirements that have already been done, ATOs, reciprocal ATOs, that types of stuff. Use some of the security that other agencies have done. Share these things, and don't try and take it on by yourself.
So it's interesting. We heard a lot of common challenges identified, coming down to leveraging existing technologies and knowledge, and ultimately sharing that and collaborating together. Chris, I'm wondering, ultimately the goal of this panel is to give the agencies here some insights as to what industry can do to help. So what are your thoughts on how the role industry plays in this overall process?
So thanks. And actually, I'll speak about it from a technology vendor perspective, not necessarily because there is, from the private sector, obviously consulting help as well. But one of the things that I made a comment in December, which was that government, the difference between government and private industry is that government thinks a lot about what they're going to do before they actually act. Whereas private industry tends to have an idea and just sort of build it and see if it works, right? Which is probably why we have so many bugs in Windows. What private industry can do is actually figure out what can be automated. So let's start down this process and figure out how to simplify what we already have. As I pointed out, complexity seems to be one of the things that I run into quite a bit in both sectors, both public and private. And there's a fragmentation between all the different solutions that people are buying. So your IPS comes from a different vendor than your firewall, comes from a different vendor than your endpoint protection. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but at least somebody has to step in and try to leverage the greater good. 1 + 1 should equal 3. And it turns out that what ends up happening is 1 + 1 equals 1 in a lot of cases, if you're lucky. So I guess what I'm talking about is automation, looking for places where you can take technology and make them leverage it, help each other. So for example, if you've got an IPS, or if you've got a SIM, in our case, you can watch network traffic, passively profile assets, find out what they are, and then provide the ability to compare it against the CMDB, the configuration management database. Instead of having 3 different pieces of technology that do all of those things, have them collaborate together. so that you don't have to have humans that are providing the checks and balances. The technology does it for you. So that's just one of the things that industry can actually help with, is just get some tools to market quickly that help you to do a couple of things. Tie yours together, and I'll talk about this in a little bit later, but also measure before you act. That's one of the things that I see a lot of people doing, is acting without measurement. But I'll leave it for that right now.
Great. And Michael, what about you? And I mean, you're coming from AT&T, you must have seen a lot of good and bad examples of efficiency efforts. What are your thoughts on that?
I think one of the good examples we've had is the people on our 24/7 desk there in our Global Network Operations Center. We made some conscious decisions that we wanted to present them with something that was in English, easy to follow. They could say it to somebody on the phone. And then we made each part of an alert something they could click on and get a lot more information, that drill down type of capability, including an IP address. You know, you click on it and you can look it up. You can even do a scan if it's active on the network. So kind of building the alert around them. Sometimes we say we wrap it in a bow for them, but letting them get more details if they want them, let them hook to other systems kind of behind the scenes, and making it as easy as possible for them to investigate that alert quickly and take action.
Great. Chris, back to you. You kind of mentioned earlier that there needs to be, so you're getting at, I think, that there should be some collaboration going on between these organizations. So where do you see some of the overlap between priorities between industry and government? You know, when the government folks always say they want to learn from what's going on in industry, do you see some common priorities? Are they very different?
It turns out that a lot of the stuff that I talk to, when I talk to customers in both industries, it seems to be a matter of terminology. We're all kind of doing the same thing, and it may be a matter of priority. Again, I think the biggest difference is, define before you act, or act before you actually know what you're doing. And it's, to be honest with you, that's pretty much driven by revenue in the first place, right? Because private industry is trying to create a lot of money, right? And so government is trying not to spend the taxpayer money or spend it wisely. But at the end of the day, things like continuous monitoring, we don't use that a lot in the private industry, but we're doing it, right? We understand that that's what has to happen. So it becomes sort of a codification of the concept in terminology that's common to both industries. But for the most part, we're all struggling with the same thing, except if you look at the little Venn diagram, right? What you'd see is sort of classified information, how you're dealing with that. But the more that we get into, say, public health programs, we're starting to blur the public sector with the private sector. Even banking and finance is becoming highly regulated, so it feels a lot like government when I start to talk to customers. It turns out I think we're all sort of solving the same problems, maybe with just a slightly different spin, but we use different terminology.
Any other thoughts on that? All right. Chris, one thing I mentioned last night was kind of this notion that we're not doing our due diligence when adopting technologies, and so we may be moving too fast, and that could have negative security implications. I wonder if you talk to that and what your thoughts are on if that's the case, and if so, why?
Yeah, well, so in the industry, security is important, just like it is in the government, just as important. The difference is that in the industry there is a quick adaptation of different technologies, which allow for often better and more capable security measures. The key is to make sure that you actually implement in anything that you're doing. So going to the cloud, for example, you need to bake in that security from the very beginning. You need to make it part of your solution. You need to, in every aspect of what you're doing, you need to incorporate your security people, your information assurance people, and your operations people, and include them in the security. Make sure you understand the business processes. Don't go into it. You don't go into the things like, okay, let's just do this and we'll worry about security later. You're better off baking it in rather than brushing it on. You get lasting security, and it costs you a lot less and saves you a lot of time and money.
So I'm curious to know why is that a challenge? Is it is it our fault for not getting those folks involved? Whose responsibility is that, and why is that still such a challenge? Because I hear that, that's something we hear about all the time, but it seems like it's still a problem.
Well, it is because, again, we kind of go back. In the industry, you don't have, depending on the organization, I guess, too, there isn't a lot of as much red tape or bureaucracy that you have to go through to get something done. There's, you can include as part of your business model to actually do that. In government agencies, that I've worked with, many of you and represented, they actually, I didn't turn this to it, but it's security is kind of a pain in the butt. You know, they give us so many problems. There's so many regulations we need to do. We'll do that. We'll take care of it, and then but we can do that later. They're going to come in. They're going to do their scans anyways. They're going to, they're going to find some kind of fault with it. And the reality is that if you include security, information assurance, you do this from the very beginning, you have a shorter time to get your ATO to actually publishing and getting to the endpoint that you want, your final operating capability. Because you're including the security, you're baking it in, and you're doing that from the very beginning.
Right. And so David, and I know, your area of focus, specifically ICAM, is it possible to become more efficient, reduce costs, and improve security? I mean, is this something that can be done, given some of the challenges we've already mentioned?
Yeah, again, with the same notion that you can reuse a lot of existing infrastructure. I run into customers all the time that those environments where there's an identity and access management solution in place, yet if you look at how many systems or how many applications it's touching, it's actually not managing the majority of the environment. And then you end up with a lot of people doing the same kind of work but manually across a lot of different systems. So if there's a way to leverage that existing infrastructure and tie it in so that it is enabled to basically automate the management of the security across the rest of the environment, that provides a much more efficient environment. So we've been working with a lot of customers to try to help them get to that point. And in a lot of cases, once they figure out the way to interlink these various solutions together and leverage the existing workflows and the processes that are built into their identity and access management solutions, they find that they can become a lot more efficient, and at the same time have the ability to go back and prove that they have very strong controls around who can gain access to specific systems and applications.
Great. Any other thoughts on that from other perspectives?
Second the motion.
Sounds great. Chris, back to you with regards to compliance, one of the headaches for many folks in this room. There's a lot of current regulations and requirements, seem to be more and more getting added every month. How can they expect to achieve compliance in this do more with less environment that we're living in?
So yeah, so the budgets continue to get constricted, and so and there are every month there's a new regulation or compliance or something that you have to add on top of everything that you're already doing in the government. Even like last month, Obama put the executive order out for mobility solutions. In the next 12 months, you're going to have mobility solution in place, and the next 90 days you need to have the framework in place and have a SharePoint or whatever site up there in order to show your progress on it. So the requirements continue to pile up, and the only way of doing that is to streamline and automate your processes. And again, it kind of like a little bit, it all keeps tying back in, is that you need to adaptation of technology needs to be in a timely fashion. You need to actually embrace it and utilize and share resources across agencies. The cross-domain is really picked up, but being able to share if different agencies are tackling a problem, share that information, share that requirements and solutions that you're providing, that you're working on, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
actually.
Yeah, please.
So I agree with that. And to dig down a little bit deeper, it's funny because I looked at, I did a project about 3 years ago, and I looked at different compliance mandates across, there were about 400, 500 of them that I had to look at across the globe. And it turns out when you start to map them to each other, you find a lot of overlap. So in addition to intra-organizational processes, making those things work together towards a unified scorecard, you can also unify the controls across many of these compliance mandates. So when a new one comes out, just map it to what you already have, and then say, look, we're already compliant with 2/3 of this because it's all overlap in the first place. It may be a little bit more detailed, less detailed than what you already have. So that would be the first part, and then roll it up into something that you can actually track it, like a GRC solution, right, which does both technical controls, and you can also do manual controls and operational controls in a GRC product. Because at the end of the day, the point is to comply on one hand and to make it as easy as possible to comply, But the thing that people forget to do is add, what are you trying to achieve from your own security policy perspective, right? What do you want as an organization? So I would suggest that you should add that into this whole mapping and make sure that you're compliant with what your organization wants, not just what other organizations want you to do. Because security is about effectively some goal that ties back to your organization's mission. It's not just about what FISMA says, right? There are other things that you need, that you're concerned about that are directly tied to the mission of your organization. So make sure you include that as well.
Well, what about something like continuous monitoring? I mean, that's something that I think agencies, everyone talks about. There's obvious benefits, but everyone still seems to struggle with that. What can industry, or what do you think agencies can do to support that initiative?
Yeah, continuous monitoring is an interesting one, right? Because it's something we all know that we need to do, and the reality is, it should tie back to what you're trying to do anyway. But the question then, and I was just talking to somebody in one of the executive briefings today, is, what does it mean? It's sort of ambiguous right now, and I think that's probably the biggest struggle. So in other words, it's not a particularly difficult concept to grasp. SIMs, and I come from QRadar, or Q1 Labs, so we have a SIM, so we understand that you feed all your stuff into that in real time. You can run rules and reports against it, and it kind of is continuous monitoring. If you take all that and you percolate it up into cyberscope, then you're part of the way there. I would suggest that it's probably not enough. You also need to put, again, GRC in there, because you need to take care of the non-technical controls as well. The biggest problem that I see when I talk to people about continuous monitoring is that it is ambiguous, right? What does continuous mean? It's sort of like the SSAE 16, right, or the old SAS 70. You define what it means to you, then you get audited against what you defined in the first place. So if you say, I'm going to have crappy security, and then you do an audit, and the auditor goes, yeah, you got crappy security, you're like, I'm compliant, I'm good to go. So is that really what it's going to be? And at the end of the day, of course, the point is that you're supposed to be measured against your peers. And so I think part of the problem is people are sort of waiting to see what it means and finding out what their peers are doing before they actually take action. So at the end of the day, I suppose there's two things. I just said a lot, and I didn't give you anything to do. So here's something to do. Number one is have a strategy. What is your strategy? If you don't have a strategy, get one. It doesn't matter what other people are doing, or go ask other people, try to leverage what they've already done. And then go forward, right? Because at the end of the day, if you don't do anything, you're never going to accomplish anything. And use technology that's going to help you to get there. Put in a SIM, find out what somebody else is using, collect data, put in a GRC tool, feed it up in a cyberscope, and then iterate. So at the end of the day, the penalty is not doing anything, and you can always improve your security posture after the fact, right?
I think that second point's important, because ultimately talk is cheap. You got to eventually do something about it. It's great.
Much quicker than I did.
Next series of questions that we have are kind of focused on different areas like consolidation and mobility. We kind of laid a foundation for a lot of the views on this issue. Are there any comments or questions right now from the audience, or should we just keep going? All right. First of all, consolidation, obviously one of the biggest, I think, ways, or the most common ways, before even cloud came so hot, that we were achieving efficiency. So from an identity access management perspective, how does that fit into data center consolidation projects, David?
Yeah, so I actually see two different kinds of data center consolidation projects across the agencies and customers that we have. And one takes the form of just leave the existing environments where they are and start working on building a new environment. Those tend to start looking a little bit more like building out cloud-looking environments, whether it's inside or outside. Really, location doesn't make much difference, but the style of which you're setting up the servers and the fact that you're building out new servers and building out a new identity and access management system to control access to those servers, that it's a lot more automated is really the main focus. And I think that's really what a lot of people want to try to get to, is an environment where, based on workload, we can spin up new compute servers and have them basically process the load, and then when they're not needed, they can be killed off out of the environment. Those environments tend to look a lot more virtualized than the traditional data centers full of servers, point purpose physical systems. The identity management in that environment is much easier, because you're talking about a new system, and you can just create globally preferred identities for every user, and you don't have to worry about any legacy migration. And that's really the biggest challenge of migrating an existing data center into or consolidating lots of different systems across various departments into a new data center, is addressing the legacy identities of users, the legacy access control policies and rules that have been defined, because we have to maintain those unless you want to go back and re-ACL the file systems. And so that means that we need some mechanisms to be able to map the existing identities to the actual person objects in the directories that we're using within the identity and access management systems. So that can be two different approaches to do that. In both cases, the primary focus is on the access management and making sure you have strong identities of the users that feed into the access management policies.
Great. Next big topic we obviously have spent a lot of time on over the past day already is mobility. Chris, I was wondering, what are your thoughts on whether mobility can be implemented securely? I hope the answer is yes, but I wonder what you've seen out there, what common challenges are, and what your perspective is.
Sure. Well, I'm from industry, so the answer is always yes. I mean, if you ask, the answer is yes. We'll
Stupid
do it.
question.
We'll figure it away, right? No, but reality there is. The answer, it can be done security. Problem is that we need to look at security. We need to change our paradigm on how we think about security and securing devices and in general, the users. With mobility, it's changing. The devices are changing. So what we really need to look at is what's the workflow? What are you going to do with the device, the mobile device, and who's going to be using it? What's the role of this that's going to be applied to this device for this user? So if you have an iPad, for example, or any device, you can say, I'll give you 3 examples. You can make it can be a manual. I'll explain this in a minute. The workflow, you can say it's going to be used for email only. That's all we're going to allow it to be used for. Or 3, I want them to do, I want them to work on documentation. I want them to basically use it as a full desktop, essentially. So you're like, okay, so there's your workflow, and what's going to be done with that device. Now you're going to say, okay, and let's secure this based on roles. Okay, these devices are going to be done for email, so we're going to make it only email capable, and we're going to do PKI certifications and secure communications, and all we're going to allow them to do is use email. You can take away through MDM solutions and so forth. You can actually take away all the ability to put applications on, so there's no Angry Birds or anything like that. Or if it's going to be a manual, for example, you disable everything. If you're working in a SCIF or secure communications area, you're carrying around paper products, paper printouts that are secure documentation and so forth. You can bring your presentations, your PDFs, all your secure documentation. It's the same thing, but you just disable your Wi-Fi, you disable all your communications capabilities with this device, and it's a manual. It's still a mobile device, it's a manual. So if it's a desktop, if you want them to actually do work in a desktop environment type thing, you're going to deploy a virtual desktop environment. You're not going to have the data. You're not going to have any of that kind of stuff resting there, and you're going to deploy that functionality with this mobile device. So you're basing it on what is the workflow to be able to get this information and to actually secure this mobility. You can do it. It's a little bit different way of thinking. You're not having mobility used to be I have a laptop. Well, a laptop was a general purpose thing. So I could take this laptop, I could give it to the CEO, I could give it to my analyst, and no matter what it was, who was going to use this, it could fill that function for whoever is going to be able to do it. And we just do some security there. But with the mobility, we could say, okay, all we want to do is these specific functions, and you're securing it based on the role in the workflow.
Great. And what about the one thing that we don't talk a lot about is the connectivity side. So what about that, Michael?
Yeah, I would say that our Chief Security Officer at Amoroso for the last couple of years has been very concerned that he could have a security policy for the people who work for us that says you can't go to Facebook. And that actually wasn't the security team that decided that, but the decision was made, but then they can reach in their pocket and they can connect to Facebook because they're just using the 3G or 4G network. So he has had us working on a project that'll become available this year to let you connect to the same security node that we use for our network-based security customers on the government side, MTIPs, and enforce policies. It's your policy. If you say Facebook okay, Facebook's okay. If you say it's not okay, it's not okay. But we see that the need for a secure connection from the mobile device, VPN connection to a node, where you enforce policy. And what we have announced and is being rolled out is the idea that that device, it can be one device, but it can have the business side as well as the personal side. Our attorneys advised us that was very, very important. So this dual persona, either through software or a combination of software and hardware, kind of has to be there first. Then a client lets you do VPN, lets you scan, make sure the phone is clean. And then that network-based stuff that we already have, the capabilities to do the policy setting, filtering in the network kind of thing. You can put all that together, and it puts you in a much stronger position than having just an MDM solution.
Sure. The last question on mobility, I'll ask to David. Just in general, what are some security best practices that people can keep in mind for mobile access and just cloud in general?
Yeah, so my background is identity and access management. Of course, I'm going to say strong authentication is probably the biggest thing to focus on, because we need to make sure that we know exactly which devices are communicating inbound to our applications. We need to make sure it's the right user that's on that system that's accessing the application. Even if the user's coming from public networks, we want to make sure that we have strong authentication mechanisms. In the mobile device world, it's actually, in order to preserve the user's experience of unlock device, click link to get to the application, the user really doesn't want to see user ID password prompts. Besides, we know passwords are kind of weak anyway. So it'd be a lot better if we had the ability to issue strong credentials like PKI credentials to the device and require that in order for the user to gain access to any of the services that we offer to that device, whether it be your own custom applications or just access to network shares or the email system. PKI mechanism for authentication is probably the strongest, because at least I have to have my device and I have to have the PIN that unlocks it. So combine that with mobile device management solutions ability to set and define a passcode, and the passcode policy mimics a lot of what we do on the smart cards. Right? If you think about the PIN application on a smart card, it requires a PIN to be entered. If the PIN is entered incorrectly X number of times, the smart card locks. I have to take it back to the security officer to get it unlocked. On these devices, we can set those kinds of policies, so if it gets in the hands of someone that's not authorized and they're trying to guess at my passcode, that the device is going to self-destruct. It's going to eliminate all the data. The device is a cache of data anyway, so I'm not really losing anything. I just go plug it back in and re-register the device if I can regain control of it in order to get my data back and access to the corporate environment. But strong authentication is really the main thing to focus on. And then, of course, if we're issuing strong credentials, it's how do we register that? Think of it just like the badging process, and think about what you go through in order to vet a new employee as you give them a badge. You're going to need to do the same kind of thing for these kinds of devices to make sure you've got the right person that's authorizing this device to get credentials that would potentially gain access to the corporate environment and the networks.
So we've heard about authentication. We've heard connectivity, security. Any other ideas from the panelists in terms of general security best practices for mobility or cloud computing? Have we covered some good ground? Continuous monitoring. All right. So last but not least, we heard earlier maybe Brian Wilczynski or somebody talked about I want to say the Air Force or the Army had moved over to email to the cloud. And I was wondering, Michael, if you could talk a little bit about that and what improvements AT&T has been making or you've seen government making in general for email security.
Absolutely. In our scrubbing of mail in the cloud, you throw away a lot of spam and stuff with bad attachments. And the biggest upgrades we made in the most recent period is the ability to do data leakage prevention signatures. So stuff that probably shouldn't be leaving in clear text, to spot that, even reject it back to the user if that's what you're looking for. And then the ability to have an encryption add-on so that you can send, all of your user base can send an encrypted message. And I will share that we had an event inside of our company earlier this year that started out very rough. The people at the very top of the company said, I'm not being efficient. This is an efficiency thing. I'm getting all this mail that I don't want. And then, of course, our mail experts look at it and say, well, it's not really spam. It's not technically spam for this reason or that reason. So this is actually gray mail. It's not clear that it's spam. So we put together a set of filters for gray mail. And I hadn't seen this before, but Ed Amoroso got a message right back after we put the filters in, and it said, awesome and had at least one exclamation point over it. It's rare for your security team to get those kind of feedback from the people above. But I would say that, you know, if you can, you might take a look at gray mail and look at possibly setting up a quarantine for that mail that isn't technically spam, but it may not be wanted, and you may have a couple hundred of those or so, you know, hitting people's inboxes and it's affecting their productivity.
Sure. That comes to a close of our questioning. I have one final question to round it out. Are there any comments from the audience? Yes.
I ask the panel, what is the least efficient thing that you see the government doing in IT security today? If you say, stop doing one of them, is there one?
Yeah.
I'll take the first stab at it, and the answer, the number one thing is not to let go of your contractors, right? You were saying, no, contractors are a good thing. The least efficient thing, I would go back to, or the most inefficient thing is trying to do everything on your own. Trying to reinvent the wheel and slow adoption of technology. The commercial industry is able to do it. They jump all over technology. I mean, probably most people in here are big fans. They're big techies, and they want to go. You know, they get the latest iPhone that comes out, and but in the government, it's slow adoption of technology, which you never realize the true efficiencies that are actually coming out with technologies. If you know, it changes every 18 months. After 18 months, your efficiencies are completely gone. So if it takes you 18 months which is a good time frame to get something implemented, then you've lost all your efficiencies that you were shooting for.
You know, I would actually add to that. I think another one, kind of dovetailing on that, is leveraging what the government is doing. You know, I know, you know, Phil works for OMB. They have the MAX program. It's a wonderful tool. I think it's free for government folks to use. You know, Colleen got the question yesterday, or I think it was yesterday's session, about, you know, can we use your SLAs, and some can be used, some can't be. But there's a lot of work going on that everyone can leverage between each other. I don't think that happens enough either. I mean, that's one thing that I hear conversations in my research. When I'm having these talks, I said, have you talked to that guy? Have you talked to that gal over there? And they said, oh, I didn't know they're doing that. And I think, you know, obviously we're trying to achieve that with GTRA, but the more you guys can collaborate as a community, I think there's a lot of the answers already out there that you're just unaware of. Yes, another question?
The acquisition process, the way you buy IT applications versus buying security are kind of separate tracks. So even though every application RFP has a security function and a risk function, it generally almost is inherent because you've got a different infrastructure that buys the security and then manages it from your application stuff. So my question is kind of a next generation to thought leadership going on that. Do we see security as a service being a part of kind of the next generation, and or from a data architecture standpoint, do we see the potential of kind of leaping generation of technology to have XML schemas or markup languages that are specific to security, so that we can actually drive the security function down to the individual data kernel, if you will?
So on the second part, that's kind of already happening, right, with SCAP, because, I mean, that's effectively what they're trying to do, right? So I would agree with that. Backing into the security as a service, there are a lot of people providing that, and I will say this. It has promise, but I think the challenge is going to be the ability to provide strong security that's tailorable by any organization that uses it. And it kind of goes back to what Parham was saying anyway, is to blend two things together, which is the siloed nature of how security is. And by the way, as vendors, we never like to say what's bad. That's why none of us really answered your question earlier. No burning bridges here. But I mean, effectively, the siloing is part of the problem, and intercommunication is good. But what I see is that Agencies don't trust each other. Just because some agency did something, I hear other people go, oh yeah, they did it, but we're not gonna do it the same way, right? And so there's a fundamental lack of trust. So if you take that and you apply it to SIM as a service or any sort of security as a service, you can say, here is a great general model, and here are the things that you can tweak to make it work for your individual organization. But I would say, I'm just spitballing here, at least 50% of the organizations are going to, it's never going to work for us. So I think that's going to be the challenge to do it, unless, of course, there is a top-down mandate, in which case you will anyway. And we know with top-down mandates, it really succumbs to the lemon principle, which is, you're going to comply to the least common denominator, not try to exceed the mandate itself. So I like the idea of it. I think it can help, but it will have the same effect as compliance, which is just making sure that the laggards don't end up, or the laggards actually catch up to some standard. But the people who are visionaries are either going to be dragged down or they're going to buck the system, or roll their own in the case of security as a service.
I would just add that I think there's the potential to create an environment where, as people are developing apps, that they have more options to say, I want this to be in an encrypted container. If I establish a connection, that should call a VPN, and it should use VPN, tear it down, get rid of that when it's over. So I think if we can put more tools like that in the hands of the people developing apps, you could have very specific apps that are more secure than what they have at their fingertips today and are able to give to us.
Any other questions? Yes.
Just curious about thoughts on future security design. We've had the bagel paradigm for a while, hard and crunchy on the outside, soft and chewy on the inside. And I'm just curious, in your work, is there a better way to approach securing networks rather than trying to rely on the tough hard shell? Is that actually something that's beneficial to the users anyways, if it makes it so difficult for them to get to actually communicate?
Here, I'm going to take that first. You want to go? So, yes, there are solutions out there. Not a single solution, but you need to integrate multiple solutions in order to achieve your defense in depth, is what you're asking for. The true defense in depth. You can do a lot protection from the outside, but what does that do for your soft and gooey inside? You look at the average time for a compromise of a system is approximately 73 days for when a system's compromised. That's the industry average, roughly. So 73 days, you're sitting there operating with a compromised system, and then you find out from a third-party vendor, which is approximately about 98% of the time, that you have a compromised system. So the damage is done, a lot of data's gone. It's impossible to really track down everything that's happened. There's capabilities out there. There's industry is using it where you're minimizing your compromise time. The maximum time you're ever going to be compromised is 24 hours. There's solutions that allow you to do that. It's multiple layers of defense in depth that have that capability. But ideally, you've got to think outside of the box in terms of security. Okay, because hackers are always one step ahead of you. They're always thinking they know what your network is. No matter how secure you are, what agency you work for, the bad people really, they know what you have in place. They know what tools you're using. They know exactly what you're in the rules, and it's just a matter of time before they actually really find a way in. So it's keeping that level of uncertainty in there. It's adding these extra components, pieces that additional solutions that will keep them guessing that there's constantly changing. So there's no way for them. And what's going to happen to actually penetrate you and be sure that they can get out and bury their tracks. The goal there is that hackers aren't going to mess with you then. They're going to go to the next easy target, to the organizations that aren't doing that special one thing. They don't want to deal with that. They want to go for the easier, the easy, soft, gooey targets. So it's a matter of constant change, adding some differentiating tools in there that they don't know, that are always changing, that's going to give you that edge.
I think I would add to that, you know, we can learn quite a bit from the mobile world, given that the network is not part of the equation. It's not something that you worry about protecting in the mobile world. The network's provided by AT&T, Verizon, Sprint. I don't care where it comes from. This device still gives me the access to the services and applications that I expect to get to. Right, so the focus becomes the endpoint, and make sure that security is wrapped around each of the endpoints. If you think about spinning up servers at a cloud provider and want to be able to spread your risk across multiple cloud providers, how would you set up an environment where you could run a server at Amazon, one at Rackspace, one at Savvis, one at ViaWest, or hundreds or thousands of servers, and have them spin up and go down based on load, and you know, if one service provider has an outage or they start charging you too much money, you want to be able to move them to other providers. The only way to secure that kind of environment is to focus on the endpoint and have the endpoints self-protect and not focus on the network. The network's not going to help us anymore in the future. The thing that we need to be protecting is the data itself, and we need to start looking at getting that container around the data from, you know, in the past we looked at the network, then we started looking at the servers. You could look at the application as a tighter container, or you could look at the data itself as the tightest granularity of the container, and say, how do I protect that? And at the end of the day, you still need to have a policy enforcement system. You still need to have the ability to strongly identify the actors, the people that are allowed to gain access to the assets, and be able to identify the assets themselves in strong fashion, so that you could describe policies that would enable you know, those containers to protect the data that you're trying to protect, and then also, you know, enable people to gain access at the appropriate people.
Yeah, you actually stole my thunder there. I was gonna, so the visionary, there's two parts to it. There's what can we do today, and then there's the visionary part. And so I agree, protecting the data eventually. So you need to protect the endpoints anyway, because bad guys will do bad things with it. Like, excuse me, with Stuxnet, they can take control of SCADA systems and then do bad stuff, like spin up a centrifuge and cause, you know, a meltdown. So that's not data oriented, that's system oriented. So you do have to protect that, but you also have to protect the data. And I think in the future, what we're going to see is data that's self-protecting, self-destructive, you know, so you can destroy remotely, et cetera, because at the end of the day, you put data on somebody's mobile device, you lose control of it. I don't care about MDM, I don't care about anything else. The data is the data. So, you know, that's always the risk. Today, you know, it's tough because we focus so much on defense and depth. I don't think, you know, while I know that the least common denominator, thinking the attacker's going to move on to the next softest thing, and sorry to disagree with you, Chris, but the attackers now, if they really want your data, they are going to stay for a long time. We know with APTs, these guys will take a year to actually do the reconnaissance to figure out what your system's protection are. It doesn't matter if you change it or you have something special. They'll send out a flame type of malware, and they'll figure it out, and they will attack that system until they get it. Now, for just the regular sort of, you know, normal people who are just sort of randomly hacking in, yeah, they're going to move on from a door that has a lock on it. But the thing that we know is that protection in and of itself, the more we put on it, it doesn't help. You put a lock on a lock on a lock on a lock, it's just a bunch of locks. You know, they're going to use the same lock picking techniques on all of them. So it's just like, and I pick on airport security, but they do great work. But you don't stop the bad guys at the checkpoint. That is not the only place that you can do your job. Your job also comes from intelligence that you do feet off the street. The reason you can't bring airport or liquids on airplanes is because Scotland Yard caught 24 guys 2 weeks before they actually got on the plane through feet on the street intelligence, watching purchasing history, getting credible eyewitness or testimony from some informant. So all of those things also have to go into it. So yes, protect your data. We've got a lot of protection stuff already in our networks. It's already too complex. Now you got to monitor it. Look for bad stuff. Look for patterns of behavior that allow you to detect things early on and stop the kill chain before your data is actually stolen, before systems are compromised. In worst case scenario, if they do get compromised, at least you can do full impact analysis and say, my entire network of 5,000 machines isn't compromised. It's only these 20. Those are the ones I got to burn down, and I know this is the data that's got stolen. So protect, monitor, and then let's wait until somebody comes up with really smart data that knows how to protect itself.
Yeah, Mike?
I just agree with the other panelists on the data focus. I would say as an exercise, maybe what you want to do is say, if I knew that there were attackers that had penetrated and were in the soft part of the donut, what would I do? What am I most concerned about happening? And then make that your plan and go ahead and do that stuff right away.
Terrific. Well, with that, we're actually out of time, so I think that last question was much better than mine, so we'll end it there. Panelists, thank you very much. And with that, we conclude our day. Casino night, as I mentioned, is in here at 7:30. So you have a couple hours to relax, unwind, and we'll see you back here in a few hours. Thank you, everybody.